Hello. What I want to talk about in this example is how one might compute the funding that would be required for a defined benefit pension plan, and to show that it's not completely unreasonable and that defined benefit pension plans are still affordable as long as they're not abused. So what we have here is a spreadsheet which we're going to work through. So let's take somebody whose current age is 22 and their current salary is, we'll say, 60,000, and they want to retire on a pension which is equal to 2/3 of final salary, so 67%, when they retire. And we can see that 2/3 of final salary is, we can see what goes into this, so the final pension, that 2/3 of final salary is the 60,000 times 67%. And if we assume that this person is going to retire at age 65, and we can then use actuarial tables to get their anticipated age of death, which is going to be based on life expectancy, so this 21 is equal to the 86 minus the 65. We can change the assumptions if we have different people, if we want to make it male, female, and obviously different ages of retirement and so on. So 21 years. So we want to create a pension fund that will enable a pension of $40,000 a year to be paid for 21 years. What fund is required? Well, the fund required obviously depends on the assumed discount rate, and if you like, the rate of return that we're going to get on that pension fund as it's drawn down. If we assume a discount rate of 0, then obviously what we would need in here is, it doesn't quite work because of the factors, never mind. Let's make it a very small discount rate, 0.0001, then the annuity factor is about 21, because in effect there is no discounting, and the pension fund would be equal to 21 years of the final pension, so 21 lots of 40,000, which is $840,000. However, if we assume a reasonable interest rate, and this is a real interest rate, so over and above inflation, let's say 3%, which is not outrageous because until recently the federal government was offering a 3% real interest rate on Treasury inflation protected securities, what are called TIPS, and historically the stock market has actually achieved a higher return than that, maybe sort of 4 or 5% over and above inflation. So 3% shouldn't be unreasonable, but we'll be conservative, we'll assume 3%. And then based on that, we can see that the annuity factor that we can compute, well, the annuity factor up here, I've put in the formula for it, but it essentially depends on how many years there are to go, which in this case is 21. Let's just lose those. We've got 21 years. The discount rate, interest rate is 3%. That's going to give us an annuity factor of 15.415. And so we can say the present value of the annuity, that is starting at age 65, what fund would you need to generate this pension of $40,000 a year for 21 years? Well, it's $616,000. We can see that here. It just comes from multiplying the 40,000 by the annuity factor. Okay, well, that's how much fund is required at retirement. And what's the equivalent annuity? Well, we can do it various ways, but I like to look at it like this and say, okay, if the employee is currently aged 22, and that means there's 43 years until retirement, so this 43 years is the age at retirement, 65, minus the current age of 22. Okay, they've got 43 years to save up. So yes, they need a fairly hefty pension fund on retirement of $1,616,000. How much is that worth today? And again, we'll use the same discount rate of 3%, and based on that we can say, okay, we'll just discount back to the present day. The present value of $616,000 in 43 years time, if the discount rate is 3%, that's $173,000 or $172,983. So, okay, well, if the employee had $172,983, they could put that money aside, they could invest it at 3%. In 43 years' time, when they get to age 65, it would have become $616,601. They could then use that to buy an annuity or draw down $40,000 a year for the next 21 years. And if they do it through an insurance company, in effect they can spread the risk, so if they live until they're 100, they can carry on drawing a pension of $40,000 for not 21 years, but what's that be, 35 years. On the other hand, if they only survive until age 70, that's a bit of a shame. They're only going to get the pension for 5 years rather than 21 years. But obviously what the insurance company does is, on average, it can afford to guarantee everyone until their death. There'll be some winners, some losers, just the way it goes. Okay, so the employee probably doesn't have $173,000 today. What they have is a lifetime of earnings, or the next 43 years of earnings. So we can say, how much would they need to contribute every year for the next 43 years, which would be equivalent to having a pension fund of $172,983 today? Well, we can do that using the annuity factors, because we know that X multiplied by the annuity factor for 43 years at 3% is equal to the present value of this fund. And so, again, the annuity factor is dependent on the discount rate and the number of years, 43 years, so it gives us 23.982. And so the equivalent annuity that the individual has is $7,000 a year. That is to say, if the individual were to save $7,213 every year for the next 43 years, that's equivalent to having $172,983 today, which is equivalent to having $616,601 at retirement, which is equivalent to having $40,000 every year for the next 21 years, or, as I say, through an insurance company, $40,000 every year until they die. And so we can see that as a proportion of current salary, how much does the individual need to contribute? Well, we said if their current salary is $60,000 and they were putting aside $7,213 every year for the next 43 years, that would give them a reasonable pension on retirement. And clearly, if we were to change the salary from $60,000 to, say, $100,000, everything goes through, it's still 12% of salary. Okay, let's see what happens if we were to change the numbers slightly. So we'll extend across. Our baseline then is providing for a pension, or saving up for a pension from an early age. Now, we might make slight differences. We could say, well, female life expectancy is typically greater than male life expectancy, so perhaps the female life expectancy is slightly longer, probably 23 years, 24 years. So if a female gets to the age 65, anticipated age of death is say 89, and maybe a male, because what I've used in the first column is the average, so let's say a male life expectancy is probably slightly less than that, so let's say 84. Again, it's typically females is typically about 5 years more than males. And so, okay, so a female would actually have to save 13% of salary, a male would only have to save 11%. And maybe this is one of the areas, or one of the few areas in life where females actually get a good deal, because the way pension funds are set up is that they only have to contribute the same as males, even though their anticipated pension benefits, because they're going to live longer, are in fact greater. So 11%, 13%, 12% is reasonably affordable. What becomes unaffordable is what happens if we say that the age of retirement is brought forward. So suppose this individual wants to retire at age 60 rather than age 65. Well, then we can see it goes up fairly substantially to 17% of salary. If the individual is prepared to retire at 65 but doesn't actually start saving until the age of 35, then again the level of contribution that's required is fairly substantial. We end up with 22% of salary required. On the other hand, if we change the assumption, assume that the investment was not in risk-free Treasury inflation protected securities, but was invested in the stock market, and if you think that you might get a 6% return on your investments in the stock market, both this is sort of saving up for retirement and during retirement, then it's not too bad. At the age of 35 you start saving, so you're only going to be saving for 30 years and you're going to fund 21 years of retirement. It's only 10% of your salary that you need to kick in. If you start saving at age 22 and you're going to get a 6% return on your investment, then it's only 4% of current salary that needs to be put in. If you're prepared to retire on only 50% of income rather than 67% of income, again, everything is go down proportionately. Even if we go back to our original case of say 3% rate of return, it's 9%. So you can see, you can play around with these numbers. Clearly we don't know what rate of return will be achieved. We don't know what life expectancies will be. The figures that I've got here are based on current mortality tables. With the change of the environment, maybe changes in medical technology, could well be that for anyone who's currently aged about 20, by the time they get to 65, well, maybe their life expectancy at 65 is perhaps, and they're going to live until they're probably 95 because of changes in technology, so that would be a long retirement. On the other hand, maybe they're prepared to work longer anyway, so they work until 70 and they're going to fund 25 years of retirement. So again, you can make your assumptions. Yes, pension obligations are huge, but defined benefit pension schemes, if they're based on this, which is obviously assuming no salary growth and in effect no sudden changes in salary, so to the extent that we're funding pensions based on average salaries rather than final salaries, this is actually a reasonable assumption. And I hope I've managed to convince you that defined benefit pension plans are not completely outrageous, and maybe you shouldn't give up all hope of receiving any social security ever.